Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to our final webinar on Women Leading Change. I'm Betsy Robinson. I'm the President and CEO of Tier 4 Group. We're a women-owned IT talent, services, and security company. Change is part of all of our lives, both professionally and personally, and how we respond to the change often determines our future successes. By promoting the leadership of the women we've engaged throughout this series, including today, we hope we've inspired you to face whatever challenges are calling on you to navigate. And we hope that you might consider engaging Tier 4 Group to be a part of those efforts. We're always here to help. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our final topic, winning at work and home. This is a topic near and dear to my heart as a mom, but one that both new and seasoned parents struggle with. The simple fact of the matter is there's no balance in winning at both work and life at home simultaneously because of the relentless change that takes place at both places and sometimes at once. So here to introduce today's panel and to take us deep into this conversation is our moderator and mom to 11-year-old twins herself, Nikki Rayburn. Thank you, Nikki.
Oh, thank you, Betsy. Yeah, it is simultaneous for sure, the changes, and COVID has certainly kind of lacked all of the greatness that we do both at work and home on all of us. So there's a lot of empathy for what we've been doing for a long time. As we dive into this conversation, I'm going to do something different that those of you who have joined us in the past, we've always kind of let the panelists introduce themselves, but I felt like I want to introduce these fearless women and really brag about what they do because they're modest, they're fearless and fabulous, but they're also very modest. And so I'm going to take a minute to kind of give you some context for who's joining us today. So our first panelist is Amelia Fox. Hello, Amelia. Amelia is the Chief Strategy Officer and Chief of Staff at Lutheran Services Florida. It's a very large nonprofit in Florida that serves 1 out of every 50 Floridians. Their services include, and bear with me because I'm going to have to read this list, and I'm going to read it quickly: refugee programs, guardianship services, youth shelters, Head Start and Early Head Start, the Child Care Food Program, counseling services, disaster response, sexual abuse and treatment program, teen court, case management for child welfare, foster and adoption, substance abuse and mental health, and more. I didn't even go through the entire list. So Amelia is married to her husband, Mark, and mom to Noah, who is a fantastic teenager. We were just talking about the tweens and teens, and Noah's pretty fantastic. So welcome, Amelia. Our next panelist is Sylvia Gedge. Hello, Sylvia, who joins us from Toronto today. She is the founder and president of ScriptString, a North American technology consulting firm based in Toronto. And she's in business with her husband, Warren. And that is a dynamic for you to think about. But they actually manage it very beautifully and are quite the power couple. Sylvia is also mom to 3 boys, 13, 11, and 5. And every time we talk kids, she makes me so grateful that I only had twins. 3 boys, that's crazy. Our next panelist is Diane Kokotov. She is the Executive Director of ITSM and Automation of Wellstar Health Systems in Atlanta, Georgia. Diane is a veteran career mom who started her corporate career after leaving the military with a 3-year-old in tow. And I just think about that transition, what that must have been like with a 3-year-old. And I think that's something. Diane is a results-driven phenomenon, and she is married and also has an 8th grader at home. So Diane, how is 8th grade math these days since you had to do that while working full-time in all that you do? And last but definitely not least is Kenyatta Walker. Kenyatta, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Kenyatta is Vice President of Client Product Support at ADP, where she's responsible for leading support and digital transformation for ADP's products and internal applications. Kenyatta is married and is the mom of an active sports daughter who plays basketball, runs cross country, and is on a travel softball team. Kenyatta's goal is to attend 90% of her daughter's games, and we're going to talk about how she does that. So ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start the conversation by kind of noting that I thought it was really interesting that half of you always saw yourself having kids and a family, and this is just the life that you're living, that you'd imagine. But some of you weren't necessarily sure you would have kids until you wanted them, and then you were on your way. So Sylvia, let's start with you. You had a lot of parenting responsibilities through a younger sister that you took care of growing up, and you were quite career driven all through your 20s. Tell us about that. What happened there?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nikki, for the warm welcome, first of all. I definitely wasn't sure if I did want to have children, to be honest. I had a baby sister when I was 15 years old. My mom had to go back to work sort of pretty much, really sort of early, and I needed to take care of her. So every time coming after school, being 15-year-old, I'm always with the baby. And I felt like I, really raised her because my mom was working so much, and, we just needed to sort of, make ends meet. And then, I got married, did the regular things that people do. And it was like, okay, well, Sylvia, now it's your time to, have babies because that's what people do. And I'm like, no way, I just raised the kid. So I didn't have that, natural inclination. I'm like, okay, I want to have a big family, have 3 children and sort of, so I actually jumped into more focus on the career. And after university, I got my first job, which I loved, and it was with a media organization. And it really sort of grew, that the drive. I'm like, you know what, I am hungry for that knowledge, and I really wanted to do more. I wanted to do something and contribute and be empowered. And it was a great organization. So 3 months into being with that position, I got a promotion. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And it just, I worked hard. So I think sort of when you're young, you don't actually realize that you're really working for the things you're earning that. But, 3 months later, I'm like, okay, this is great. I've learned new things. I want to learn more. And at the time my boss was really my mentor. And I remember sort of, pulling him aside and saying, hey, Rob, what do I need to learn to get your job? Like, I want to be a manager. What do I need to do? And, we laughed at it and it was great, but he did coach me. And 2 years later, there was an opportunity where he needed to relocate. The position came available and I got the job. So it's sort of, always, I definitely had the drive, but as I approached 30, it was like, I felt like something, I'm like, okay, I have the job, I'm married, I can buy nice shoes. And I'm like, something is missing. And it was, at that point I was like, yeah, I think I feel I'm ready, to now have a baby. Even though I'm like, well, I don't really know what that feeling is because, I compared sort of stories to the friends and they had like, that baby drive, but I'm like, I think I'm ready. So I remember sort of my son, who is 13, his birthday is today. He was born at sort of 12:50, and it was like it was like this miracle that happened to me because I never have felt such a strong emotions until that day he was born. And well, you know what? I have 2 more boys, and then pretty much kind of from then onwards, it was a juggle, right? It's now it's sort of parenthood and career, and managing sort of that priorities.
Yeah, and I love that story because I do think that there's so many people that, think that every woman just, of course, naturally wants to be a mom. And I don't know, I know a lot of women, I know a lot of women now who don't have children, right? And that's, they're all, people come through life from all different places. So I love that story, and your boys are precious. Kenyatta, you have a different experience though, because both your parents worked and you never really knew a different way. Tell us about your experience and share that with us.
Sure. So, one of the things I always share with individuals is that I'm actually from Mississippi, and I grew up in a two-parent household where both parents worked, and it was just a part of what I expected. My grandmother before worked, and what I always saw was parenting that, what I would call a great co-parenting relationship my mom and dad both had the opportunity, like if one was working, I remember when I was younger going to Head Start, my dad fixing my ponytail and combing my hair and helping me make sure I was dressed and ready for school. Or if it was an opportunity or a time where I needed something done with homework, like my dad would jump in or my mom would jump in. And then we also had a close family support there. So my grandmother, who of course is no longer with us today, but when I was younger and growing up, she would come over if my parents had to work late, or if they ended up, because they were factory workers, so if they worked the night shift or a different time, my grandmother would come in, make dinner for us and some of those things. So my experience was always to be a working mom. I didn't know anything else. And so it was interesting when I went to college, I met this woman who told me she was there, was my first roommate for her Mrs. degree. And I was like, what's that? You didn't come to school to like aspire to greatness. And so it was quite interesting to learn that, there were people, or there was a world out there, and it was a different experience for me where people, like she was actually there at college to get married and not have necessarily a long-term career.
Yeah. That hits home for me because I had a Southern grandmother too who was just baffled why I didn't want to take home economics. I mean, how are you going to find a husband? So let's shift into business then. Diane, one of the things that we've all talked about, is that career-oriented women have really high expectations for themselves. Other people also have high expectations. And so, I've got a little bit of a two-parter question. Let's talk about expectations first. When it comes to expectations, whose expectations do you feel like you're spending the most time managing? Your boss, your kids, yourself? What is that like for you?
Yeah, that's funny because I always feel I have to manage my own expectations. So I grew up in the era of the Superwoman, the song bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan.
Jolie, baby.
So, I'm the toughest. I'm the toughest on myself. And of course, it does have ramifications on my family and all the people I encounter. So I sometimes forget that most people are not the way I am, and they want to do what they need to do rather than try to do it all, like me.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pick up on that because I think it's interesting. Do you feel like because you have such high expectations for yourself, are you then raising the bar for other people around you? Or do you find that, you tend to give other people, kind of give them some slack because you're so hard on yourself, right? I say that because I'm the same way, and I struggle with it. So how do you handle that? What do you think is your situation?
Right. Well, I can't say that I lower the bar for anybody else, but I will evaluate people based on their own merit. But what that means is if I see somebody and I go, I know you have potential and you're just not living up to it, I will push them. My dad used to always say, you know what, if you're a C student and that's the best you can do and that's your potential, then I'm all right with that. But if you're an A student, you better get cracking. So that's the way I think.
Yeah. And we can all do so much more than we think we can. Amelia, what about you? Because you and I've talked about this a lot too. In terms of managing expectations for yourself and others, what does that mean to those that you lead? And by the way, I mentioned this on the call. You have a lot of people from Lutheran Services Florida. They're on this call, so no pressure. but it's a great question and one that we've talked about a lot.
It's a great question, and I'm sure quite a few of them are going to roll their eyes when they hear me talk about it. But the short answer is it's definitely my own. Much like Diane, it's my own expectations are what I have to manage, really, through this. And I became a mom later in my career. I was one of those sort of not thinking that definitely didn't go for the MRS degree either. And so I spent most of my career not learning balance, right? Just focused on career. And then all of a sudden I can vividly remember like a light bulb going off when I understood what the word delegate really meant. And as I'm sitting at my desk one day with a ton of stuff to do and a lot of things I wanted to be involved in and decisions I felt like I had to have an opinion on and be there, but it was 5 o'clock and I needed to get Noah from daycare or DCF was going to be on my back, right? I mean, it was one of those things where I really understood letting go. And what I've learned over the past 10 years or so is Yeah, the kind of managing expectations is predicated on two things for me. One, it's trust, and two, it's embracing that diversity of thought. And as long as I can remind myself of that, that I can let go of things, I keep a high bar. And I'm, like Diane said, if you're a A student doing C work, that's not okay. If you're a C student doing C work, that's okay. So I do push people, and I push those aspects and don't let go of it. But what I try to do much more is trust that people can get things done, and they will get things done, and embrace that it doesn't have to be done my way. And that's where there's probably a few eye rolls happening, but because it's a constant learning thing for me. But it's a piece that I really, really focus on, that things can be done different ways as long as we're still marching in the same direction and headed toward the same vision. So,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of managing expectations and letting go where I need to let go.
Yeah, and lots of different ways to do the same thing. That's good. That's wise. Kenyatta, you have a beautiful analogy for how you orchestrate all of the support networks around you to kind of make this thing work. Can you talk about your orchestra analogy? I don't know if you get tired of talking about it, but I'm just like, this is it. Share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I don't believe in work-life balance. And one of the things I think a lot of women do is we aim for this perfection, as Diane mentioned, the super mom, and trying to do it all. And so I look at it, one thing I've learned very early in my career is I have a saying, it's like, did you do your best? If you did, yes, then forget the rest. Because I think as women, we beat ourselves up over and over and over again. And so with that, I look at this whole concept of parenting and work is like women, we're conductors of orchestras of our own lives. And as these conductors, we're, each individual section, sometimes you just have cymbals back there making noise and they're clang, clang, clang. And then some days you're making this beautiful music. And I think that on the days that the cymbals fall on the floor, it's okay, right? You have to give yourself permission to move forward. Did you do your best and forget the rest? And then really look for as much harmony as you can get throughout your day. And things won't be perfect all the time, but there will be some beautiful music, and there will be things sometimes where the cello and the music doesn't quite all chime together as one. So when I look at it, it's like, hey, what's today? Is it an orchestra day where I'm bringing in the flutes and calling in, whether or not I'm gonna attend this meeting, be here, be this place, and you think about your everyday schedules. Am I going to a basketball game? Am I going to be able to, attend this meeting? Am I going to go to this conference? Can I say yes to this particular event? Can I say yes to this girlfriend's trip? Those types of things. And you have to really start to orchestrate those in accordance. And I really do believe that comes with a strong foundation. I've been very blessed that my husband's extremely supportive of everything that I do in my career. So he definitely is, a great life partner that helps me make this music. If not, some days he takes over and he's conducting.
Okay, so this is a great time to talk about your goal of attending 90% of your daughter's games across 3 sports, because I mean, my kids aren't even that active in sports, and I feel like I can barely handle, what we had in front of us. So how do you make that happen? I mean, what are some of the roles that people fill, and how do you jump in and orchestrate that even?
Well, some of it is cheating because I talked about my husband, and he's also my daughter's softball coach. So that helps a lot when he's actually going to take her to practice and he's going to be there. So all I have to literally do is show up for the game. So that's a big takeaway, because you also think about moms that have to get their kids to practice and all these other things. The other thing you have to remember is we have a rule, right? So there's a certain grades that you have to maintain, and my daughter's also in the 8th grade. So sometimes we also cheat a little, because if the grades aren't right, okay, you're not going to play this particular sport, or you need to step out because you're not, living up to, you're a student first and then an athlete. So we also make sure that's important. But most of the time, we're very fortunate those sports don't run concurrently. We only allow her to play one travel sport. Like, she can't play travel basketball and softball because of the commitment. And luckily the school sports kind of go in, in a specific time frame. So one, scheduling works. It's not all, one time. That's very helpful. And then the second thing I do is just try to put everything on the calendar. And if I need to go in, and I've gone to softball games during the week when it's a school game associated with the middle school, and I've had to say, all right, where are my jeans and my t-shirt, and am I changing in the bathroom? Am I changing in the car? or in the truck before I go into because you can't wear these type of clothes to a hot softball field. So I've done some of those things to make it work, but I usually try to make sure my schedule is set around it. I know what the school schedule looks like. I put it in immediately, and everything else I try to, as much as possible, float it around it.
Yeah, I remember reading, I guess it was in her book, Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg talks about, it's okay to cheat and go into the restroom and return an email.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is just kind of what we do. You're present at the game, but hey, sometimes you just have to take time out. And so it's really hard to be able to make all those plates spin. Amelia, you and I have talked about, the whole fear of missing out, right? FOMO. And that FOMO is not just about the fear of missing things in our kids' lives, but sometimes it's also about missing things that are in our careers too. Should I have accepted this promotion? Should I have done this, right? And so how do you work through those times when you feel a sense of, FOMO?
It's a very real thing, and I mean it's such a funny phrase, but I constantly have the narrative going of I should be a full-time mom, I should be better at my career, more ambitious, I should be a full-time mom, I should be more ambitious, managing that. And it goes back to that I can bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan era that we grew up in. But at home I fear that I've missed out on play dates with Noah and making connections with friends and people in the area, being his primary educator, having cookies after school, right? I've missed those days. And then I go to work and I feel like I've missed out on building a better network and on more advancement, on the freedom to pursue new opportunities. And so that piece is there, and it's there all the time. What I learned, and I learned this actually years ago before I even had Noah, about just embracing the season of life you're in. And so I constantly remind myself of that. The season of life I'm in right now is I've got a kid who's 12 and needs a lot of attention, and it's important for me to be there for him, and that's a priority, so that I set some parameters around that. So for me, dinner time is critical. It's not critical for everybody, and I don't think it has to be everybody's thing, but it's my thing. And so most days a week we have dinner together. I love grocery shopping, I love planning dinner, I love cooking dinner. COVID has screwed that up a lot, but beyond that, that's a majority, that's an issue. So I don't say yes to a lot of things at night. And similarly for the morning, I don't say yes to a lot of early morning meetings anymore. I don't do the 7 o'clock and 7:30 coffees and breakfasts so that I can make breakfast for Noah and get him to school or get him to camp, and kind of hold those things sacred. At work, so that I feel like I'm balancing it on that side, I really embrace the successes that I do have. And I try to choose those activities and those paths that make me a better leader. And I try to focus on making the people around me better leaders. And if I feel like I've come home at the end of the day and I've helped somebody, or I've listened, and I might not have gotten as much done, but I've been there for somebody at work to help them be a better leader, then I feel like I'm doing that, and that's the season I'm in. And do I look at the women who have multiple kids and CEOs and 40 under 40s and think, why not me? Of course, but I then look at all the other choices I made that have let me be able to live in Tampa and go to the beach on the weekend if I want to, and have a great son and a great husband and a dog and a kitten, and life is okay. So I think it's being okay with what you've got and really focusing on that that's so important, because that FOMO it'll eat you alive if you let it.
Yeah, no, it will. It definitely will. So Kenyatta, if I could ask, and you don't have to reveal anything too telling, but when the cymbals fall on the floor, when we forget things, and particularly with your daughter, because I do, I feel that same sense of connection. I want to be the best mom. Like I remember telling somebody who actually happened to be a therapist, I was like, and this was as I was having kids, and I said, I'm so fearful that I'm going to mess something up. I don't want to be that reason that something doesn't go right. So you've got a beautiful way that you talk to your daughter. Like, how do you handle those times when you have to miss a game, or that you forget something, or, something goes awry? What do those conversations look like between you and her?
Sure. So I always say that for a 13-year-old now, she's extremely mature. However, when she was younger, the conversations were probably a little bit more difficult. I've always been transparent and honest, right? I usually am pretty good about not totally forgetting, but more so, hey, I'm not going to make this experience. This is what's happening. with us, well, there's a couple of things. So we believe in, there's faith first, then family, and then the career and work. And so one of the things around faith and family that she is aware of is that I truly believe Mae Jemison has a quote that says, "Never limit yourself to what others." Essentially, it's never limit yourself based on others' limited viewpoints and the way they can see you, and also don't limit others because of your limited ability to see what they can become. And I do believe that as I have progressed in my career, I take it very serious, the seats that I sit in and the tables I get to sit in. And I really do believe that sometimes me being there in the room gives others the ability to see another woman of color being successful. And so I talk to her very, seriously about, hey, this is also about allowing, not just being your own personal role model, but how do I become a role model for others? And so she and I have those conversations. We talk about my schedule. I said, hey, I'm going to be late for this, or I won't make that. But again, I do a pretty good job of prioritizing and making sure that because I don't have to go to practice on Wednesday nights or Monday nights, right? So I only have to be there for the game. So I'm pretty transparent with her, and we have those conversations about what the schedule looks like. Now it's much easier because she's older and much more mature, and she'll laugh sometimes. And she was at a private school for most of her younger life until last year, and there was a lot of parents that were stay-at-home parents and at the schools, and she just now would say, "Mom, you're not built like that. That's not who you are. That's not your personality. It's not your thing." So she very much accepts that. Versus when she was younger, it was tougher because it's like, oh well, my mom didn't come, serve cupcakes at 12 o'clock, and I'm like, not my thing. So now she's older and it's much easier, and I can just sit down and explain to her what's happening, what's the schedule, what time am I going to show up, and I can tell that she's extremely grateful when I'm there. And I I hate to use the word balance, but I try to keep those times where I'm not there down, because I can tell when she's like disappointed. But then she also says sometimes she has better hitting days when I'm not there. So
That's good. That's good. That's good. Oh, that's so sweet. So, Sylvia, I want to turn the conversation and talk about the power couple that you and Warren are, right? Because you are the president of your company. Your husband is an executive leader and a consultant in your company. So, what's the hardest thing about co-parenting with an ambitious partner? You're both trying to build a company, but you're also both trying to further your careers. Like, what's that dynamic like, and what are some things that you've learned along the way?
Well, I think the one good thing is that we've been together for a really long time. So we, those trials and tribulations and figuring it out, we've been figuring out for quite some time. So we've made some headway. We're going to be celebrating our 20th anniversary tomorrow. So we did sort of, get a really good, practice so far. But I think sort of the key, whether it's co-parenting or whether it's sort of, running a business together, it's finding sort of that team. Like it's really sort of seeing each other as a partnership, seeing each other as equals. And I have been really fortunate that, Warren is very much so, has been supportive throughout sort of my career. Any crazy ideas that I might have had, sometimes it would be like, okay, well, let's talk about it before he would sign up for the journey. But I think sort of, what we generally do, whether it's, whether it's raising kids or going through a transition where it comes to taking on a new role or, changing perhaps a career path, is we talk about it, right? I'm a big sort of communicator, make sure that, okay, this is what the plan is, let's picture what it's going to look like. And then at that point, kind of pinpoint, okay, well, this is what some of the problems that, some of the challenges, what might come up. And if the opportunity is so great, and that sort of the other person obviously is going to have to pick up the pieces, we either sign up, say, yay, I'm going to be that, play that supportive role, and, go ahead, let's sign up kids for another soccer game, or, another, we have 3. So it's, It's always sort of, balancing act, but we make that decision together. Do we sign up, and who's going to play that supporting role? Because it's very much sort of throughout our time together, we've always sort of, had to be that supporting partner. And when you sign up for it, like, you own it. And I think we know each other well enough that, the other person who signs up, you have to own it. And listen, it's not always pretty, but that's what we sort of, sign up for, right? So I think really the key is, agree before you actually take on sort of, something new.
A lot of head nods on that. That's interesting. I think that's very wise and good. And it's funny because I tend to be the impulsive one in my partnership. And so I think my husband would say, if we just talked about it before, he's like, you just made a decision and we didn't have this conversation. I get carried away. Diane, I want to ask you about change and how you've managed change, because change is constant. Kids grow up, careers change, and you have, I think about going from the military into the corporate world. You've moved, around the country. You've even had an international stint. You had a son at 42, right? You've got change down. So how do you navigate that? Give us some wisdom on that.
I'm insane. Well, so I'm a fixer. So when I have change, I just see it as an opportunity to fix something, and I see it as a new adventure. So, I'm very much always open. And usually I'm the one, you talk about the impulsiveness, that would be me. And I'm the one, yeah, let's move to Australia. It'll be great. So I do embrace change myself. And kind of Kenyatta made a comment about faith being first. And I believe that everything happens for a reason. We may not know the plan. We don't sometimes need to know what the plan is, but I do believe that there is one. So I always try to keep that in the front part of my mind when change does happen. And sometimes you sit there and go, are you sure? But usually it always works out for the best.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing to keep in mind, because there rarely do things happen that you can't make another decision to get out of a decision or to modify it in some way. So that's a great mantra, I think. Amelia, you've dealt with a fair bit of change as well. You've moved, and even as you guys have moved to Tampa, Noah's changed schools. And one of the things that you and I were talking about was just kind of constantly being aware of having the right systems in place to be able to manage the change and kind of navigating through that. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've definitely had a fair amount of change. I think I was thinking about the first 2 years we were here, we moved 3 times, and Noah was in 2 different schools, and it was a new city and a new job, and I knew everything. So, and that's just sort of a slice of it. It really, at work, I'm a change agent. So it's sort of what I do. It's part of who I am. I'm kind of like Diane. I'm fixing things, I'm solving problems, but that doesn't mean it doesn't get really exhausting and really frustrating at times. And I think having those systems and structures in place are critical. So from a home perspective, I'm fortunate enough to be able to sort of outsource some things that cause me angst. And so I have someone help clean the house. I don't do the yard work. I do the grocery shopping, but that's, kind of, my husband does a lot of the other kitchen stuff. So really being able to kind of manage that so that I don't have that pull and that angst of what do I need to do to keep up, and I can focus on navigating through the change. And really both at home and at work, I making sure that we're celebrating and understanding that it's a process, and that, celebrating every little win is important. I started today I had a 10 o'clock call with a couple of women on my team, and it was amazing. The very first thing she said, one of them said was, it's only 10 o'clock and we've had 2 victories today, right? And there were 2 little things that are big in of themselves, but small in the scheme of things, but they were victories. And they were victories because we see this change as a process. and is a journey that we're going through, and that, you know, celebrating those pieces are so important. Otherwise the change will overwhelm you, and keeping an eye on the end game and on the prize. And I think that's another piece of it. I, like the other women on the group, moving to Tampa was absolute leap of faith. I had been praying for a change and praying for some things to get resolved in Atlanta, and evidently the resolution was to move to Tampa. Not my plan, not my idea, not where that came from. But, you know, keeping my focus on that I'm here for a reason, and that I'm doing everything I can every day, doing the best I can do every day to get to that reason that I may or may not ever know is important. But it does help you manage through the exhaustion and the stress of change, because it's very real. It's also fun and fun if you kind of like challenge and like have some high energy, like most of us probably do.
Yeah. No, and I have a question I'm going to jump to from the audience. So I thank you, Melissa, for sharing your thought in the chat. But Amelia, I remember when you told me you were moving to Tampa, and I was like, it was, what? You can't leave. But how awesome is it, you know, that you are in this path, and it's, you know, led to all, you know, additional kinds of sharing of wisdom. So you weren't the only one that was like, what?
There are quite a few people.
Yes, I know. So maybe Kenyatta, you can take this one. But this question, and I'll just kind of paraphrase, I don't know if you guys can read this, but essentially Melissa's writing in and saying, you know, she's a nurturer, and how do you feel, you know, some days you can wake up when you're in this nurturer and you want to fix things, you want to solve problems, and you've got so much to do, or there's so much change happening that you kind of wake up feeling defeated. You know, how do you manage through those times? And I can remember telling my husband once, I think this was right after the kids were born, and, you know, it's the whole twin schedule. And I remember thinking that sometimes I feel like I'm signing up for what I'm going to fail at. That's a very real memory for me. How have you felt that before? You're nodding your head, so I'm guessing that it's not just us.
Well, I think that for one thing, I really struggled with that earlier on. That's where that whole saying was, did you do your best, forget the rest? Because that really allowed me to personally let go of the things I can't control. From a nurturing standpoint, I think one of the things that really helps me is just endorphins and getting them going. And so I start every morning with coffee, prayer, and then some type of exercise. Now I call it coffee, prayer, and Peloton, because that's the thing, since we're all in the house. But I really do try to recenter, because if you don't take an opportunity to do something for yourself every day, that is, you're going to always feel that pressure and that defeat. And for me, it's really important to take a few minutes while I'm having coffee to say a few prayer, maybe read scripture, and then follow it up with some intense cardio, because it really gives me that, if that's an hour and I have to break it down to an hour, if I don't only get 30 minutes, that is really important for me, because it really helps me recenter and personally reset, so that I can be what I need to be for everyone else. Because what I found that throughout my career, you're working, so you've got to be there as a leader for your employees. You've got to be there for your family, right? And so I even made it an intention pre-COVID to get up very early in the morning. And I've been doing this since I was 21, before I had kids, to get up early in the morning and make sure that I had an opportunity to recenter and work out. Because for me, it's really important to kind of get myself together and before I can serve others. And I think one of the mistakes that people make sometimes is we're giving and giving and giving, and we give out without taking care of self. And trust me, that hour you use to take care of self is going to make you way more productive for others.
Yes, and we will touch on that for sure. I do want to invite anyone who has additional questions to, now is your time, and to get a question into us. But Sylvia, let me kind of piggyback that question on the change question as well, because you know, as you and I have talked about, you have high energy and you love change, which I think is really, really cool. So you kind of seek that out. Have you, you know, as you kind of manage that drive, have you ever had those moments where you feel so overwhelmed that you're like, you know, whoa, I've done this to myself, but what do I do next?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think change, you know, I love adventure. I'm curious. I want, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to get involved in this project? Do you want to try, something new? I'm like, yeah, sign me up. So I do have that natural curiosity that, at times I do want to sort of, take on perhaps too much. So I think it's, change is good when it's used for the right things and to drive your growth, sort of self-empowerment. But I do remember sort of, being in a position sort of, or myself where, yeah, I'm taking on more. And, am I doing it for the right reason? I don't know. I'm just doing it, right? You sometimes kind of find yourself as this, and I'm going to say this is a younger version of myself where, yeah, I can do it. I'm an A personality, like sign me up, like I can take on the world. And then I'm doing all this stuff. And I remember visiting sort of, my parents-in-law with my son, and he was still sort of little. And because I was doing it all, I was, looking sort of, for, I was relying on my support network for, helping me with my son. And, I'm balancing my career, I'm juggling a million things. And my son starts, crying over something. And I wanted to, give him a hug, console him, like, come to mommy. And he's like, he wants to go to grandma. He was not sort of, it, like, that broke my heart. And I'm like, okay, I am doing all these things, but why am I doing it? And now sort of my older version, like where I am at, yes, I'm still going to take on change because it's something that motivates me, something that drives me. I know I have a purpose in this world and I know I can contribute in a positive way, but I do have to check with myself, like, why am I doing it? Is it still going to be, is it for me or am I trying to mask some problem? Is there something else that's happening with me why I'm taking on all that stuff, right? And with taking on a lot of stuff and, having had a baby and this thing that sort of happened in my life, I was like, I was dealing with depression. Obviously, I was trying not to deal with depression. But I think sometimes when we are so busy, we do sort of, kind of avoid, the things that perhaps might be in front of us. And we need to realign and constantly sort of check in, reflect, why are we doing the thing? So embrace change, absolutely, but do it for the right reasons.
You are so, my gosh, that is some serious wisdom. And I remember a friend of mine telling me she had 2 boys and she started, she was she's a therapist and really passionate about the niche that she's carved out because it's very, servant oriented around a particular segment of society that needs help. She started a nonprofit around it. And she told me a story after Tom and Emma were born about, because I was kind of the same way. It was like, go, go, go. And I, volunteered everywhere and was, out every night with clients and whatnot. But she told me, she said, I remember my son, her youngest son, had drawn a picture of the family in school. And it was the 2 boys were in the yard throwing the football and the dad was there and she was on the couch taking a nap. And she said that was the realization that I wasn't really aligned with how I wanted my family to look and how I wanted to be in my family. And it was a real wake up call for me. So kudos to you. And for admitting too that, we do go through those moments where sometimes there is depression and there's nothing wrong with that. And we have to figure out exercise is phenomenal, right? Those endorphins kick it up. Whether there's a supplement story or drinking more water or doing the girlfriend trips, those are important things to kind of keep in touch with. So I will ask a final question before we close, because self-care, Kenyatta, you hit on it, is so important. And one of my favorite books that I've read in the past year is Becoming by Michelle Obama. And I'm laughing because she talks about in this book, if you haven't read it, go get it. It is a phenomenal book. But she talks about how her me time was sitting in a car in a parking lot in front of Babies R Us, eating Chipotle, and how it was heavenly. And she was grateful for that being some time that she got to have. It was peaceful. But you know what? Sometimes that's what it takes. And that's what we have to do, even if it seems that silly. And so, Diane, I'm going to start with you. Like, what is your go-to in terms of, you know, self-care, and it's okay to be as funny or serious or both in this response?
One that keeps me sane, you mean?
Yeah.
A margarita.
I knew that was happening. Yes, yes.
I would say that my go-to for my own sanity is my network of friends. I have several different types of friends. I was always that kid that I never was any one particular area, right? I wasn't the sports person. I wasn't the geek. I wasn't this. I was everything. And that has helped me to actually cultivate groups of friends that are completely different from each other. And I actually use that to my advantage, because when I need to talk maybe something about work, I call a very specific girlfriend, because she also is in a career and she has a family and she knows what it's like, the sacrifices that you have to give. When I feel like I need some kind of, okay, the 14-year-old's driving me nuts, a different friend who has a son the same age, and we'll talk about that. And so being able to go to the different resources that I have with my girlfriends, that keeps me sane.
That's wise. It's like having a board of directors for whatever
It is.
you might be having. Sylvia, what about you? What do you do for self-care and sanity?
So I think sort of, similar to Diane, I have a group of girlfriends, same thing, which, might have 3 kids and are working moms. So sometimes you balance sort of, ideas. I have to personally, I love laughter. You know what? It's every day we're serious, things happen. We have to make decisions. You need to have, your A game. So I always welcome a joke, and we joke with our kids. We make up jokes, we make up stories, silly sort of songs, silly games. I feel that that's kind of how you need to sort of unwind. I reflect sort of, I find sort of, I wouldn't really call it meditation, because to me meditation is, you sit somewhere, you have blanket quiet time. So I can really do this anywhere, but I am away in my thoughts, kind of reflecting, and finding the gratitude. Like, what am I grateful for? Like one thing, something great that happened to me today. Like every day I try to do that, and that gives me sort of that sense of satisfaction. And if that doesn't help, then there is always wine.
Speaking of wine, Amelia, what's your go-to?
A couple of things. I like Sylvia. I think laughter is a big piece of it. That while I'm pretty serious and pretty intense, I don't take mistakes so seriously, right? I think I encourage my team to make mistakes. I encourage the people around me to make mistakes. I encourage my son to make mistakes. That we just, if you're working this hard and doing this much and trying to balance all these things, it's not going to be perfect every time. And so laughing at that and how you handle it is so critical for me. And so I find that when I'm more sane, I'm taking those less seriously. When I get a little insane is when I find that I'm taking things too seriously. I wish I could say like Kenyatta, I get up every morning to work out. I say that every day. I wish I could say that. But sleep is my sanity. And I give up a lot in order to be able to make sure I get enough sleep. And if I don't get enough sleep, I'm a wreck. And so I finally learned that. It means I don't know all the hit shows, and I haven't watched all the series that people watch, and I don't have time for that, but I do get a good night's sleep, wake up with a devotion, start my day off with gratitude, and try to laugh.
I love that. I'm glad you said that, because I just had this conversation with my kids about sleep. Sleep is so important, and we haven't talked about that yet. And the giving yourself grace, I think we've talked about that a little bit. If anyone out there doesn't know about growth mindset, it is not just for children. They're teaching it. It's at the center of a lot of education curriculums, but I feel like that is, go research it. There's tons of resources out there, but growth mindset is truly the way forward for moms that are trying to win at work and at home. Kenyatta, anything else that you would add to this?
Well, I know, I think when we talked a little bit earlier about, I shared my secrets, it's really about that self-centering. And like the other ladies, sometimes there's wine. If I have time, there's a good movie. But for me, it's really like I need some time in the morning to really reflect, think, and meditate, and then spend some, and prayer, of course, and then spend some time with cardio. Because those walks or runs or Peloton cycling a time, even if it's 20 minutes, they do wonder for flushing my brain and recharging my energy for the day.
This is so good. I could keep going. I have promised everyone that we would return my friends back to their work lives by the top of the hour. So I want to say thank you again to Diane, Sylvia, Kenyatta, Amelia. You are such inspiration to me personally. And I know to the nearly 200 people that are joining us today, you've been so inspiring for them as well. So thank you. And this ends our series, friends, on women leading change. We have been so excited. If you've missed any of the webinars, they are all on the Tier 4 group website under the resource library. So you can go to www.tier4group.com, which I think you'll be taken to once you click the end of this webinar. It'll go right to our website and you can look at them. We will be here to serve you in any capacity that you need us to as you navigate the change of your business climate. Certainly our talent services group can certainly help people who are looking to make change from the job climate as well. And we would welcome an opportunity to do that. So we will say goodbye, and ladies, thank you one more time. And we hope to see you again on another platform. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.